tonight we'll be joined by Dr. Nate Page, Serene Zhang, and myself, and we will talk about, we'll really examine what meltdowns, crashouts, and quelling the fire means when it comes to ADHD burnout. But before that, just a little bit about unlocking ADHD for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We are a 4-year-old IPC registered charity and social service agency. I started this because of my lived experience as a parent of a young adult with ADHD, and also myself as a late diagnosed ADHD. I was diagnosed 1 year after my daughter at the age of 50. And the reason why it's important to support the work that Unlocking ADHD does is because the symptoms of ADHD impair relationships and also cause underperformance in school, in work, and life, leading to lost potential. So we're really trying to reclaim that lost potential. The mission of Unlocking ADHD is to empower ADHDers and their families to live life to the fullest, because we want to bring hope to families who are struggling with the condition. We want to build bridges to bridge the gap between people who are under-resourced and under-informed and under-supported about ADHD, and ultimately to boost social mobility. And we're using the 4 pillars of awareness, accessibility, achievement, and advocacy to achieve that. So, going back to the topic, why did we choose burnout to have a webinar on this? Because a lot of us are familiar with the word burnout, because when we looked at the media, surprisingly, Singapore has one of the highest burnout rates globally. And when in some recent surveys, it is high as between 47 to 61% in separate surveys done in the last 1-2 years. So then the question is, why is this so? And is the burnout that we normally think about affecting people who are neurodivergent differently? We have a monthly in-person community hangout, and in the last 2 months, our team actually canvassed those who attended about what they felt were some of the causes of their burnout that they experienced, and what they've told us was things like masking, emotional burden, and I'm sure Dr. Nate Page will unpack that a little bit more later. Time and task management issues, particularly in the workplace, but also in school. Because of the exam focus that many of us in our society have, but it's also an element of social fatigue, a low sense of self, just because of the many negative experiences that we might have had growing up, and for some of us, it's really the lack of support, that we cannot control the circumstances that we're in, and we feel helpless, and that's why we lose the engagement and motivation. And surprisingly as well, for people who are ADHD, we think we're also hyperactive and so overstimulated. There is an opposite issue about boredom and understimulation. So this just to give you a sort of quick overview and context, but our 2 professional experts here are going to unpack it more. So let me introduce them to you. The first presenter is Dr. Nate Page. Nate is based in the US, in Minnesota, and he's a counseling psychologist who supports individuals with ADHD, including those who are facing burnout. And he has a particular niche in supporting healthcare professionals, like nurses, teachers, and therapists, who also are quite prone to burnout, just in the course of the work that they do. He also does group psychotherapy. And the interesting anecdote is, I met Nate last year when I went to the US for the ADHD 2024 conference, and he happened to sit with me at the breakfast table. And I was actually, very stressed that time. And, we got into a conversation, and I was telling about my life and all the work I do and how many hours I work. And then he said, and I asked him, what do you do? And then he said, oh, I'm a speaker. I'll be speaking later. And I said, what's your topic? He said, burnout. I said, oh, really? And then after listening to me, he said, you might want to come to my talk later. And I actually had planned to go for another talk, but just sitting with Nate made me very curious. So I made sure I sat right in front of him, under his nose, and I found it very enlightening. And I thought this is something that I myself took so long to realize, even though I'm the founder of an ADHD organization. And I thought it's an important topic that we need to talk about in Singapore. So that's why I have Nate here tonight. And my other guest is Serene Zhang. Serene is an executive coach who works with corporate folks, and she has a strength-based approach to coaching. And prior to being a coach, Serene also had about 20 years in the corporate field. Besides her professional life, Serene also is a parent to a child with ADHD, and both Serene and Nate are neurodivergent, as I am. So tonight we're actually coming to you really from two different perspectives, one as professionals in this area, but also as lived experiences. So we hope that, all the discussions, questions and answers tonight will be able to find a resonance with you and let you know that we're in it together and we'll get out of this together and we'll grow together. So without further ado, I would like to bring Nate on first to share, and then after that, followed by Serene. Nate, over to you.
Thank you so much, Moon Lake. That was a lovely introduction. I'm really excited to be here and be live with the people that are here, but then also for this to be a resource down the line for people that are watching this later. And that was such a fortuitous breakfast meeting with you, Moon Lake, at the ADHD conference. And with what you're talking about, and I do work with a lot of therapists, physicians, nurses, a lot of teachers, people in the helping profession. And in the research, the word that you hear a lot is that burnout is ubiquitous in a lot of those fields, meaning it's everywhere, it's everyone. So it's not a matter of if I'm going to burn out in a lot of these professions, but when am I going to burn out and how do I recover from that and prevent a future burnout? And so to hear more about Singapore and some of those statistics and how burnout is such a high thing, it sounds like maybe in the culture, but in any of the professions that people are working in. So it sounds like it has that same kind of ubiquitous experience. And probably one reason, Moon Lake, that you weren't really recognizing it is because it's baked in, it's in the culture, it's in what everyone is doing. Everyone is maybe burning out. And so why would I experience something different? That whole metaphor of, oh, if you're a fish, what's the joke? One fish swam up to the other fish and said, well, how's the water today? And the other fish said, what's water? So if we're swimming in these waters where burnout is just part of the daily experience, there's not as much of that contrast or recognition of, oh, hey, maybe I could have something different here. And so my goal today, I have about 25 minutes and wanting to do the best I can for whoever might be listening to really help you make changes to recover from burnout if you're in that burnout place and be able to prevent future burnout. And this might be a bit grandiose of a statement, but I like to make it because it's true. But I really want to be able to change your life. And there are people that, as a result of hearing people like me talk about burnout or have experiences like what Moon Lake was talking about, of that almost waking up that, oh, I get it now. I see what's going on. There is something that if this keeps going, I'm going to get more and more injured. And so I do need to make those changes. And so the first thing that can be really helpful is to try to understand what in the heck we mean when we use this term burnout. But the simplest definition for burnout, if I were to reduce it as to the most basic thing possible, is burnout is an injury. Plain and simple. The best analogy, I think, would be a stress fracture. So burnout is when there's chronic stress, and stress is usually a good thing. We want stress, but when we can recover from the stress, then we become stronger. So if you go to the gym and you lift weights, weightlifting is one of the most healthiest things you can do, and that's putting a lot of stress on your muscles. And it's a really good thing. But usually with something like lifting weights, you do that maybe 3 times a week at most, because you need a lot of recovery, because you break down the muscles, that stress tears the muscles down, but then your body rebuilds and you become even stronger. So the stress is a healthy, good thing. But if I wanted to get really strong and I decided I'm going to lift weights every day, or I'm going to lift weights 4 times a day or 17 times a day, then that much stress my body can't handle. It's too much stress and I will get injured. And so that's what burnout is. It's when there's that chronic stress that outpaces our ability to recover every day. And so with that metaphor of a stress fracture, or sometimes like a tendonitis or other chronic stress injuries, those are what you can say about a stress fracture. You can say pretty much the same thing about burnout. And so burnout happens in different stages, but we will eventually get to where it's a very real injury. And what's, I think, fascinating with the research on burnout is they use terms like bruises to the soul. That's one of the recent articles in the nursing peer-reviewed journal article about burnout. So bruises to the soul. So people are recognizing this is very, very real injuries. And so the recovery from burnout, I think it can be really helpful to view it as the same thing as tendonitis or a stress fracture, where we really need to reduce the stress, and probably reduce the stress so much more than we need to in the burnout prevention phase. Because when we're preventing burnout, if we can reduce stress maybe even a little bit, that can help us get back to a place where, oh, I can recover every day, and this stress is maybe a helpful thing. Once that injury occurs, and there's that stress fracture or tendonitis, then I can't just take a little bit of stress off. Usually it means that we have to pull out the big guns here and really reduce the stress long enough for me to recover. So this is one of the main takeaways that I want people to come away with, is burnout is a very, very real injury. Um, One of the hard things is we minimize it, and we, maybe have shame or stigma, and we think, oh, well, everyone else is uh, doing things. Why can't I do it? Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm just not strong enough. Um, but if you remind yourself that, no, metaphorically, I have a stress fracture, so I can't walk in the same way other people can walk. Um, and in order for me to be able to return to that place of being able to walk, I need to really let my stress fracture heal. I need to maybe wear a boot, metaphorically. Um, and so a lot of the work that I do with people is helping them get to a place where they can finally reduce the stress enough to heal. And so oftentimes when I'm doing individual therapy with people, or even in the groups that I run, it might take several months where I'm being patient and helping the person finally get to a place where they can at least acknowledge the need to really reduce their stress. And that does oftentimes look like, if this is workplace stress, um, looking at a medical leave, or, I mean, if they're privileged enough, being able to take a break or not work. Uh, I've had a few presentations where I've been talking about burnout, and people will share their stories. And a number of people will say, I needed a year, a two. One woman who was a social worker, it was like she was a plant in the audience, but she said, I needed 5 years, not at all in the social work profession, to heal from burnout before I was ready to come back. Um, so these can be very, very real, big, enduring injuries. And one of the questions that we get a lot, and maybe this is coming up for some of you, is what's the difference between burnout and exhaustion? How do I know if I'm just really tired versus, no, this is burnout? And again, that injury is one of the best ways to figure it out. If I'm just exhausted, usually a week vacation will help me feel better. And so that can be a good litmus test. If I take a week vacation and I'm ready to go back to work, I'm excited, I have that energy renewal, then yeah, this was exhaustion. If it's burnout, then a week vacation is not going to do much of anything. 2-week vacation probably won't do much of anything. And the analogy that I like to use is that a cell phone, when it's exhausted, you plug it in at the end of the day, and then it'll go back up and it'll work beautifully. It'll have the full battery. Burnout is when there's an injury to the battery. So the battery, and then this is actually a term that is used in energy resources like batteries or gas, fuel, other things like that. Rockets are designed to burn out. So the metaphor with the cell phone is, no, the battery actually gets injured, and then it won't retain the charge. So you might plug it in at the end of the day, and maybe it has a charge, but then in an hour or two, it's down to the critical levels, and you need to plug your phone in. And this doesn't happen as much anymore with phones, but it used to be the case. And most people, you've maybe had this experience where you're having to carry your charger around throughout the day and plug your phone in at the different meetings. Luckily now there's more boundaries, restrictions in place where your the battery in your phone won't get injured. And so phones today do a better job of not having that burnout injury. What I think might be helpful is to talk a bit about the 5 stages of burnout. And this, I think, really rings for a lot of people and helps them recognize, well, in what stage might I be in right now? And helps them realize, oh, I was really burned out before that. Those were the stages that I was in. Um, and this is probably one of the most valuable things we can do in our time today. And I like to use a 4 or sometimes a 5-stage model of burnout. And so as I'm talking about this, think to yourself, in which stage might I be in? And the first stage is usually referred to as the honeymoon stage. And this is where I'm excited. I'm wanting to work hard and do great things. Maybe an example of this would be a brand new elementary school teacher. And those beautiful desires, I'm going to work so hard, I'm going to change the children, I'm going to interact with the parents, and I'm going to do wonderful things. And as ADHDers, we're at a higher risk in some ways of being in that honeymoon stage because the novelty of things, the hyper focus, we can get really wrapped into things. And the honeymoon stage is usually pretty short, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but we can fall into that, well, delusion might be one way to say it, of, oh, I can work 16 hours a day and I can be the best teacher ever, or the best college student ever, or the best medical student ever. And yes, this is sustainable, but it's not sustainable. And what will happen is pretty soon there's a very short stage that we call the awakening stage. And this is kind of like when you're driving a car and the check engine light shows up and there's a sign, oh, something might be off. I might not notice it yet, but there's the cues. And so this is when we start to realize, oh, maybe this isn't sustainable. Or maybe I'm not so excited to go into work every day or to talk to all those parents as a teacher. And so if we're able to make changes and reduce the stress and get back into a sustainable place, then we won't progress to the next stages. But oftentimes in our first time through the burnout cycle, we don't pay enough attention, or we really believe that we can keep going, or we've already bitten off commitments and we're in systems where, oh, I'm not able to reduce that stress. Or maybe in cultures like Singapore, or yeah, when we're in grad school or in certain professions where we're expected to live with the chronic stress and just make it work. And so most people will then go into the third phase, which we refer to as the slow down phase. And this can last months, sometimes even years. And this is where, oh, it's not just that there's the check engine light. There are the things we start to notice, the maybe metaphorically, the rumbling in the engine or the other sounds, or maybe a little bit of smoke that's coming out. And so the things that happen with burnout, there is that exhaustion. But then the exhaustion that turns into, oh, I'm not recovering day to day. And then even with the long weekends or the week vacation or a 2-week vacation, I'm not recovering. In addition to the exhaustion, there's what we call the cynicism or detachment. And so we start to emotionally protect ourselves and maybe withdraw. And we're less excited about things, but maybe even we start to get numb, and we're like the pain that we see in our clients or the students that are really struggling. I have less energy, less time, and I start to not really be able to attend to those things. And then I might even start to get cynical and be like, oh, well, kids are this way or clients are this way. And there's often a lot of shame when we see those things in ourselves. Well, oh, why am I being cynical? Why am I feeling numb? Why am I detaching? I'm an empathetic person. Why am I losing that empathy? But it can be helpful to recognize, no, this actually is a very protective, good thing. And it's your body, your soul, your mind's way of trying to cope with this stress that's too much. And so to develop some of that callousness, to have less empathy, it's not desirable, but it is what your body's needing to do. And then the other thing is there's more of what usually starts as a perceived lack of being able to do the things that you want to do, to be capable at your job. There's perceived inefficacy. Oh, I'm not a good therapist. I'm not a good teacher. I'm not a good uh, accountant or whatever it might be. But then those things start to turn more into reality of, oh, I'm not actually doing, I don't have the energy. I don't have the time. I may be cutting corners more. I'm not showing up on time. And so then it usually turns from perceived inefficacy to, oh, I'm actually being less efficient. And one of the things that human beings are very resilient creatures. And so we can be in this slowdown phase for a long, long time and still be showing up, still be working hard, still be doing a lot of good while that injury is happening deeper and deeper, more and more. And again, if you're able to make changes in the slowdown phase and reduce the stress, then you won't proceed. But again, lots of times we're stuck in systems, or we've bitten off more than we can chew, or we're not privileged enough to be able to reduce the stress. And so what eventually will happen is we get to this fourth stage that is referred to as hitting the wall. And this is really where your body kind of gives out. People will go to the emergency room. People will quit jobs. I, I, I find it fascinating. It's been several years, but I watched some YouTube videos of news reporters quitting on live TV. And at least my interpretation of it is a lot of them probably hit the wall in this type of way, and they're just done. They can't do it anymore. And so it's fascinating to see on camera people probably having this experience of hitting the wall. We won't watch it now, but there's a video that I sometimes show of a marathon runner hitting the wall, and you see their legs buckle and then they're down on the ground crawling. And so that is what happens to people, and it is unfortunate when people get to that place. And then I've recently been talking more about a fifth stage, which is the Phoenix rebirth. It's when I'm able to let the burnout happen and start over. And that is often then, I need a new career, a new industry. I need to get out. I need something very, very different. And there's a lot of healing that needs to happen before that energy returns. So I think I have a few more minutes. I noticed that there were a few hands being raised and other things, so I'm glad people are being active, involved, maybe putting things into the chat. I love in live presentations when I'm able to see people's faces and see the energy and hear people's stories, because usually this is really resonating for people. And these stages, people are like, oh, yes, that's hitting the spot. I get this more and more. So wonderful. Thank you for people putting comments in and for people attending to that. So what I'd like to use the last bit of time for is to, because the question then comes up, well, I guess I maybe should talk a bit about ADHD and burnout, so I'll throw that in. But the question is, well, how do I stop this? How do I prevent it? How do I recover? And so I want to at least give a little bit of that. And so everyone is at risk for burnout. And burnout in ADHD folks looks very similar. But ADHD folks are at such higher risk for burnout a lot quicker, get stuck in burnout a lot more. And the reason for that is because the ADHD brain and central nervous system are just primed to, one, really hyper focus and work hard and do things well, but then to be in systems that are not a good fit. And so most of these symptoms, which these are the diagnostic criteria in the DSM and the ICD-10 and 11, you can just kind of see how it makes sense that ADHD folks are so much more at risk for burnout. To have the careless mistakes, the organizational challenges, to be losing things, to be needing to pay attention to things for long enough, especially things that might be more boring or hard to pay attention to. And then even that hyperactivity, whether it's internalized or externalized, to be on the go, that sense of, oh, I need to do things, fix things, change things, the racing thoughts, the rejection sensitive dysphoria, if you're familiar with that term, that according to the research in the 1950s and 60s, most every ADHD person had that heightened sense of sensitivity to potential rejection, criticism, and teasing. And so many ADHD folks move through the world on hyper alert. I want to make sure that I don't do anything that might bring on judgment or criticism or any potential rejection. And so there's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure that's just internalized moment in, moment out. And so ADHD folks, and there's research that's showing this, are just much more prone to burnout. And then there is so much of that internalized shame and that sense, well, I'm not good enough the way that I am. And the metaphor that I like to use, I think a lot of people like to use, is being neurodivergent, ADHD, autistic, or learning differences. It's kind of like being left-handed in a right-handed world. And so there's just that in many contexts, in many academic systems, in many workplace settings, but even in a number of relationships or family systems, there's that much difference in, oh, I'm left-handed in a right-handed world. But then also the challenge with people don't really understand my left-handedness. And so there's added stress and pressure with people sending me the message, oh, you just should be able to do this. And just, I told you the 4 steps to complete this. You should be able to remember this, or why are you always losing things, or you must be lazy, or so all these corrective messages. So there's that much more chronic stress. And so ADHD folks might have that much less of an ability to recover in between those. And so that chronic stress can turn into injury. And so in my last few minutes here, we'll talk a bit about, well, what can I do if I'm burned out, if I'm in the throes of burnout, or if I'm really, burning out, or if I burned out in the past, but I'm scared that I'm going to burn out in the future. What can I do about this? And to try to be as simple as possible, the main treatment, the main intervention is to reduce the stress or to eliminate it if possible. And so a lot of the work that I do with people is wanting to first do a good diagnosis to understand, what's ADHD, what's burnout, what's anxiety, what's PTSD, to understand those things, and then to really understand what are the stressors and what are the specific stressors that are causing injury. Christina Maslach, who's a researcher, has done a fantastic job looking at workplace settings that has identified 6 main categories that are the stressors that tend to create injury. And the metaphor that she uses that I love is these can be pebbles in your shoe when you're hiking. And if there's a pebble in your shoe when you're hiking, you can do that for a little bit, a few steps, maybe a quarter mile, I don't know, and it hurts, but you can do it and you're not injured yet. But pretty soon that pebble, that stressor, will turn into an injury. So that's an important piece of trying to find where the specific stressors are. And then to eliminate that or reduce that as much as possible, get that pebble out of your shoe. And so if the pebble it's a particular relationship at work that's just toxic, it's this one person that the way they engage with me and day in, day out, it hurts. Then if there's a possibility, well, could I not interact with this person, or could I, or whatever the creative solution is, that can really, really help. And so we don't need to get into those things, but that's the assessment work that I do with people, and then to try to just reduce as much as possible that stressor. The challenge comes with burnout is when the injury has happened, and let's say that pebble is in my shoe and now I have an injury, then it's not just reducing that stressor, I need to reduce all the stressors. I need to metaphorically maybe stop hiking until that injury heals. And so this is one of the hard things to talk about, but I like to bring out the big hammer in these presentations as much as possible and just say that as hard as it is to maybe hear, if I really want to prevent hitting the wall and that continued burnout, I do need to make some big changes. And what I find myself doing so much more in the individual therapy work that I do with people that are in burnout is, let's involve family as much as possible. Let's involve the boss. Let's involve your teammates. Let's help everyone get on the same page first with what's happening here, and then what can we really do about this? And as I mentioned before, reaching for that medical leave, if that's a possibility, that oftentimes is a good first thing. Can I take 6 months off, 12 months off? And that's all depends on the systems and other thing, but that can be a really good first step to just reduce that stress and give you a chance to be able to heal. If that's not a possibility, then we have to get more creative um, and each person is in a different situation. And lots of times the work that I do is, well, we can't change the system enough. Yeah, you're a single mother or whatever it might be, and you need to keep those 3 jobs. And so what can we do to mitigate the burnout as much as possible? And I'll hold your hand. I'll walk with you through this. Let's get your support team. Let's get everyone knowing what's going on. But let's help you as much as possible until maybe a year down the line, we can shift things enough to where we can actually help you heal from this. And so there's some very, very real systemic pressures that are at play. But that's why I like to bring out the big hammer and help people see that it's a fantasy probably to think that, oh, I can recover from burnout while staying in this job or in this system that is continuing to burn me out. And there's a real dilemma so often of well, how can we best help you navigate the next few years? And it's painful, it's really, really hard work. But I value it, and it's so much better than what oftentimes can happen is people just feeling like, well, I don't have anyone on my support team. There's nobody that knows what's going on, and I must just be wrong with this. I just need to somehow buck it up more and take on more stress and be able to handle it more. So I think I'm getting close to time. We're just starting to unpack things. There's whole worlds we can explore and talk through more. So I'm glad we have some question and answer time. I see some wonderful questions being put into the chat and people attending to those. But I think for now, I'll push pause and turn it back over to Moon Lake, and then I'll be excited to jump on after the next presentation and keep rolling with this.
Yes, hi Nate. Actually, before I sort of
Mhm.
ask some questions, I actually want to bring you back on, Nate.
Mhm.
As I just have 1 or 2 questions before I bring Serene on as well. And as we're doing that, could I get my team to share a poll for the audience to answer as well? So then we will share the results of that poll with everyone so that we can see where we are. So if you could share the poll. Yeah, and then you can always move it if you're on the desktop to the side a little bit so you can still see your faces. But I had 2 things, Nate, to ask you as people are answering the poll. The first is, when I first met you, you were also sharing about some of the conditions that can cause burnout. And I would maybe like to hear a little bit more about that because you had shared about the different stages. And you
Mhm.
talked a little bit about certain strategies, but I would like to hear about the conditions that can trigger that.
Yeah, so those specific stressors, those conditions.
Yep.
Um, and then are you referring to Dr. Maslach's work, those 6 different
Yep.
categories?
Yep. That really resonated.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I can just quickly share the slide here, and then anyone can. Um, uh, so her work, and this is in workplace settings, but I've just found it applies to so many different settings. So your family, uh, your home life, things like that. Workload. So I'll quickly touch on these, and this is, I think, is what you're asking about,
yep,
Moonlight.
absolutely. Yep.
Workload is the one we oftentimes think about as, oh, if I'm working 8 hours a day, that's fine. But if I'm working 15 hours a day, so the quality, but also the quantity of work. And when that is too much, that's a pebble. So the workload can be a pebble. And so doing too much of something. But that's actually in many systems, that's not what causes burnout, even though that's where everyone's mind goes to. This sense of control is a big one. If I don't have the ability to make decisions about how I do my work and how to get things done, to be able to choose if I can leave the office when I'm done, or to be able to have some sense of being able to mitigate the stressors that I face. And so when we're in systems or we have bosses or other things where we don't really have that control, that can be a big pebble and really cause chronic stress. Reward is an interesting one. If we're not being rewarded appropriately, that's a pebble. And that does apply to things like salary, to pay. or other rewards. But what's interesting in the research is what's so much more impactful and more valuable is when there's those interpersonal rewards. So being recognized for the work that we're doing. And that can matter so much more than the salary or getting the nice parking spot or whatever the other perks are. Um, I worked with a woman who was in a college counseling setting, and probably not getting paid too much, but it was just so hard that the work she was doing and really giving up lunch hours, staying late, and a number of suicidal clients, it's just that people didn't know. And what would have meant so much to her, which what didn't really fit with the context, but if the professors and the academic advisors and even the president of the university, if they could know how much she's done for the university and to help these students that maybe would have taken action to like a suicidal attempt or things like that, that would have mattered so much. And so it's just interesting in the research that is what really matters. But to not have that can be quite the stressor, the pebble in your shoe. I'm having a good sense of community, feeling like I really belong, like I matter. That makes a big difference versus feeling like I don't matter or I'm not connected. And then this is where that sense of toxicity that I mentioned can come in if there is even a certain person, or if it's just the community, the way of doing things. If it's unhealthy, that can cause so much stress, even though the content of what you're doing and the workload or these other things you might have. Sense of fairness is a big one, that if I'm doing the work but not, if my boss is taking the credit for it, or if someone else is getting the promotion, and so that type of stress, and it's that perceived fairness, but then it can also be whether things are actually fair in an organization or not. And then values, if I have a mismatch of my values versus the setting that I'm in, that's a chronic stress over and over. And so I'm sure there's plenty of examples, but so even if you work for an organization and they have good values and are ethical and do things well, but if it doesn't line up for you in the way that you like to do things, that will cause burnout. So hopefully that's getting at your question.
Yes, absolutely, right on the spot. Okay, we're
Good.
going to close the poll soon, but just one more quick thing before I bring Serene on. And
Mm-hmm.
I would love to hear a little bit, maybe like in maybe 3 minutes or so, 3 to 5 minutes, maybe something about your own experience on a personal level with burnout.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we did allude to that as well, right?
Yeah. Oh, lots of burnout. um, from the professional side of things, um, well, so I psychologist, lots of school. I'm ADHD myself. I don't remember really reading textbooks. I remember trying a lot, but not being able to, um, but still getting good enough grades. But I just remember were the breaks in between semesters when I was in undergraduate, the first couple of years in undergraduate. I'd come back and I'd be so excited. Oh, this semester I'm going to do so much better, and I'm ready for it. So I was experiencing exhaustion. Um, but then as I got later into my undergraduate career, and then even in grad school, it didn't matter how long the break was. If it was a summer break and I had 2, 3 months, coming back, I just immediately was in that place. Like this is hard. I can't do this, and of course that optimism wasn't there as much. Um, but there was that exhaustion. Uh, there was the cynicism, the numbing, some dissociation, and then there was that perceived inefficacy. But then it turned into that, and then I was cutting corners as much as possible, trying to just stay on top of things. I was doing good clinical work at that point, but the academic side of things, uh, yeah, and with my ADHD brain, it just wasn't a fit for the system, and so I survived and made it through. Clinically, things didn't really get too hard because I love the clinical work, the therapy, the research, even the diagnostic assessment work. I love that. But then eventually, about 4 years into my grad program, when I was on internship and seeing lots of clients, uh, I wasn't attuned to it, but I remember I had an experience. It was in April. So I started working on my internship in August. And in April, I was sitting with the client and I just all of a sudden had this experience of like, oh, I got to get out of here. And I knew it wasn't about the client, but I had strong feelings against the client. Like, he just needs to be quiet and get out of my office. And I felt so much shame about that. And I was glad that I brought that into supervision and I was talking about that. And then it just dawned on me. I'm like, oh, this is burnout. Of course it has. I knew it had nothing to do with this client, but it was my I wasn't attuned to the fact that I had been burning out for months, but it just got real big all of a sudden. Like, I can't do this. And so then it was the next several months until the internship ended in August of me working and trying to mitigate things and understand, like, yeah, this is burnout. And it was hard. And I was in a system where if I were to take a break, then I wouldn't complete my internship. Um, and then that has played out, and I've gotten better at recognizing things early. Um, and then in the career in college counseling myself, I was in a golden handcuff position, great job, wonderful colleagues. I mean, so many of these, there weren't very many pebbles in my shoe, but then there were some really significant pebbles. And I really burned out, and everyone that I was working with ended up leaving.
Wow, that
And that's
must
the
have
way it
been
is.
tough. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, thanks for sharing because I think when you were sharing your own experience, I think I could see based on the reactions, online, that connected with those who are
good.
listening in. Because I think too often, we sometimes forget the person
Yes.
underneath all the stuff that we also talk about is real. And I think
Yeah.
particularly, as someone who is in the mental health space and a professional,
Hmm.
to also be human, right? We are subject to the same, challenges as well as those that we are supporting. And I think it's
Yeah.
so important to have that back in. We've closed the poll. I just wanted to share the results so that everyone can see too. Okay, so for those of you can see on the screen, we had about 113 people respond, and one of the questions was how familiar are you with how ADHD impacts burnout? 13% actually said they were very familiar. Most, almost half said somewhat familiar, about 39% not familiar. So at least hopefully we add value tonight. Okay, and then for those of the folks here who did the burnout test by Attitude Magazine, we could see that again, majority were in the 21 to 40, which is like the middle range, that not exactly burnout, but sort of recognizing certain signs. But 23, like almost a quarter, 23% actually in that higher stage. So hopefully, again, for those who are in the higher stage, they will learn something that maybe they can apply. But for the majority who are actually, recognizing early signs, this one should hopefully, as you said earlier, prevent the injury rather than to recover from injury. So we hope this will be helpful. And then, from those we ask whether they are currently experienced or have previously experienced burnout. About 70%, almost 70% said they actually have. So, we're all together in this, right? We've all had some experience with this, whether it's one time or multiple times. And one quarter we're not sure. And I was in that one quarter before I met you, Nate. Okay. And I'm still, learning how to recognize signs. And then the caregiving one, right? About 35%, are probably in the position of supporting someone and maybe themselves are experiencing burnout as well. But also sometimes some people have joined this webinar because they want to support a loved one or a colleague, right? Or professionally. I would like to now bring on Serene, and then we'll give Nate a little bit of a break, until I bring him back on again. I'd like to bring on Serene to also share her perspective because what Unlocking ADHD tries to do is actually share not just the international best practices, but also bring it back home locally, with people on the ground as well. And some of these actually are extremely applicable, but there are some situations where it might be different. And Serene, being a coach that works with a lot of executives who experience burnout and has experienced burnout herself, might have a very interesting take on this too. So Serene, thank you for joining us. Maybe you could start with just sharing a little bit short about your own experience with burnout, and then we can go into your sharing. Thank you.
Sure. So thank you so much, Monlik. Thank you for inviting me. I think 2 years ago, that's how we connected. But 2 years ago, I was featured on Straits Times during the International Women's Day, and I spoke about my burnout. And I've been burnt out a few times, but the worst one was when I was burnt out and had to stay home for 2 years and couldn't work. And one of the things I didn't know at the time was I might be neurodiverse. So to give a little bit of a context, my son is autistic and ADHD, and I've done the Unlocking ADHD's adult self-diagnosis. And yes, I scored really high. So that was one of the things that I didn't know at that time. I thought it was overwork. Well, it was. I was working an enormous amount of time and I was burnt out and I couldn't work. I had to stay home for 2 years just to recover. And when I came back, you would think, right, that now I would not go there again. But no, I actually experienced it twice more. Once on the first year of my child's life, he was an extremely difficult child, and I was really mentally, physically, emotionally exhausted. And then again during COVID. So I think different stresses come up, and I just wanted to share a little bit that it feels different, right? Those of you, I know that ADHD, as with every neurodiversity, has a huge range. But I will tell you this, right? That it does not feel like what it will feel for somebody else, especially if you're really high on the hyperactivity. So my son, the more exhausted he gets, the faster and more wired he becomes actually. So for many of us, it may not actually feel like we are burned out. It could feel like we are getting more and more wired, more and more high, more and more in a frenzy. And for me now, that's one of the signs. When I can't calm down and I can't switch off, I go, yeah, I might be exhausted. I'm definitely not burnout at that point, but that's for me the sign to go, yeah, maybe I should cut it back. So let me share my slides. I like, oh, it says my screen sharing is paused. Just give me a moment. Let me check what happened. Um, hmm. Okay, let's see now. I'm sharing my screen again and let me know if I'm able. Is it still paused? Because it definitely says my screen sharing is paused. Can you all see it or you can't see it at all?
Maybe we'll
I'm
just
gonna,
leave it for a few seconds and then see whether it loads. If
yeah,
not, and our team can help you with your slide.
sure, sure.
Perfect.
So, oh, I'm lucky. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about ADHD and burnout and what it feels. And I'm not going to cover the definitions of burnout and so on because I think Dr. Nate did a fantastic job. I'm not going to cover all of that, right? What I am going to talk about is a couple of things. One is really kind of how burnout felt for me, for many of people. Some of the stats that are local, like in Asia, in Southeast Asia, and some of the cases that I have met myself and what I use with them. Right? So I'm not going to say that this will apply to everybody, but these are things that I've seen work with clients. Okay, so as you've known, what is burnout? Burnout is when you are exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally. What does it actually look like? I'll give you a real case of a client here in Singapore. She was appointed to the head of the organization and tasked with reorganizing, sort of just revamping an organization that was essentially failing. And Global appointed her to Singapore. She's been with this organization for a long time. She's super committed. She and her team literally put in probably something like 100-hour days, 80-hour days, or some ridiculous amount of hours for a couple of months. And we talked about it. I tried to help her to pull back. And she did eventually had to pull back because she got a spinal infection that laid her in the hospital for 6 months, where she couldn't walk, she couldn't move, she couldn't work. So that's what burnout actually looks like. For many of the executives that I help, it's often to the extent where they hit something that they couldn't work anymore. And you might think, oh, well, she's sick. Not quite. So as this spinal infection is an opportunistic infection, meaning that we all have this virus, but when your immune goes down, it attacks you. And her immune went down because for months she wasn't resting. I have another executive who just sat there and broke down and cried in a major presentation to investors on the eve of her organization listing locally. And she just sat there and cried. And that was when she realized she's hit the wall, as what Nate says. So that's what it looks like in real life. And is it different for us? Yes, it's different. So I don't have, okay, I must tell you, I don't have local stats. I really wish I did. I searched and searched for it, right? But I don't have. What I do have is that globally, they have found that 54% of adults with ADHD burnout versus 18% for everybody else. Like, okay, for the general population of everybody. And locally in Singapore, our statistic for burnout is 61% based on last year's study and 62% based on a study of 4,000 people in 2022. Some of you may not be Singaporeans, so let me give you this, that in Malaysia, it is 58, and in Philippines, it's 70. So in Southeast Asia, we are facing 60 over percent for the general population. So if we go by the same statistics of 3 times, I can only tell you that probably every ADHD person locally is burnout. That's probably as close as I can say, because we actually don't have ADHD burnout stats here. And we actually feel worse. So we don't feel the same as those they feel. We actually feel higher stress, we feel more fatigue, we feel more sick days. So to allude to what Dr. Nate has discussed just now about the 6 factors, let me tell you this is how it works, at least in the clients that I see. So in terms of workload, I see that they are actually coping with what they do and the regular workload. So if you can imagine that there is the regular workload that everybody else does, and then there is this whole other layer of masking, coping, accommodating, trying to get BAU stuff, trying to not forget your appointments and so on, that goes on top of your regular workload. So for ADHDers, it's actually worse because that's one of the things we're doing. Secondly, when they talk about control, we talk about being able to control what happens at work and the autonomy of that. But the sense of control that we often feel isn't just about how much the work empowers us. It can also be that we are dysregulated emotionally. When we get a bit more exhausted, when we get a bit more upset, we then suddenly feel I'm out of control. I have an ADHD senior leader who told me this. It's like the number of times I have to go stop and take a break in the washroom because my emotions are flooding me and I can't think anymore is becoming so often that other colleagues are suspecting her of having a bladder issue. But she doesn't have a bladder. She has an issue with emotional control. She's having to go like, okay, stop. Let me take a break. And she'll go to the washroom, and a few minutes after she's calmed herself down, she's come back. But that sense that, as she said to me, like, I feel like I'm losing control of who I am. That I'm not this person that loses control so easily, but now I am. In terms of rewards, I don't actually see there being a lot of difference, but we do know that ADHDers have lower dopamine. So intrinsically, I mean, the company may reward us the same thing as it rewards all the neurotypicals, but we do know we don't produce as much of the reward hormone in our brains. So it doesn't feel as rewarding, sadly. In terms of community, the number of ADHD folks that have told me about their isolation that they feel. Senior leaders with teams, with peers, with mentors, and so on. who talk about the isolation they feel at work because people can't get where they are. And as I think Dr. Nate pointed to, a very simple question like, why can't you keep your appointment? How could you double book an appointment with yourself? Um, that sense that people just don't get them. So you might have colleagues, you might have friends, you might have team members, but that community that is there for you. Fairness as well. I don't feel like ADHD or just generally neurodiverse folks are discriminated against, but it is true that the world was never designed for us. And therefore, there is a sensation of why is the system working against me? And unfortunately, I do have to say this, being one of like somebody's working against us. They were just never designed for us. That's all, full stop. And therefore, that sense of, why is it I'm having to work so much harder? Finally, values. The things that we value, the things that we want to, inclusivity, neurodiversity, unfortunately, it's still really low. So I'm a DEI advocate. I speak on DEI at many platforms and conferences. Neurodiversity is almost never spoken about, even at DEI, conferences and so on. The values, I will not say that they don't value this diversity, but I will say that the awareness as well as the sense that we need to be including these people, we need to be including us, is very low. So let me just share some of the real cases that I've met and what worked for them. I'm not going to by any means suggest that it will work for everyone, but I thought perhaps there will be some ideas that you can take away from it. So one of the leaders that I worked with had a really simple problem, which is that when she's brilliantly, when it comes to strategy, when it comes to ideas, when it comes to stuff, and then when it comes to BAU, she just dies. So she just like deal with it. As she told me herself when we first started working, she's like, I have a year and a half unclaimed expenses just because she couldn't sit down and get it done. And obviously, this BAU stuff is chasing her. So the expenses, the finance people are chasing her reports, the HR people are chasing her. So all this chasing her is actually making her stressed enough that, in her words, she's like, I wake up in the morning and I sit on my bed, and when I think about going into work, I cry. And if you can just imagine that this is a vice president in her 50s who runs a Fortune 500, I mean, not the whole Fortune 500 company, but a branch, a significant division of Fortune 500 company, has kids, has a big house, has cars, and so on and so on. Just like, I sit on my bed and I cry. And she's not crying about all the big stuff. She's crying about just going in and knowing that finance will come after her, knowing that her emails are huge, knowing that she hasn't filed the last performance appraisal from the last time. So we work on a really simple system, and this is the system I work with for my clients, which is I call it READ because it stands for redefine, eliminate, automate, delegate. And in her case, she eliminated. The question that turned it was, what would happen if you just didn't do any of these things? Like, what would happen if you just stop? Like, if you not claim any of these expenses? And she found it liberating to be able to let go of some of these BAU stuff that she just couldn't do. So I invite you really to think about what could you eliminate from your life. And if you can't eliminate it, can you automate it? Like, find a tech to do it for you. And if not, can you delegate it? So she delegated all of those performance appraisal stuff because obviously it can be eliminated off a list. But she delegated it. She got one of her direct reports to help her out. She pulled in a HR person to help her out. And the whole idea is redefine what these things are in your head. Redefine whether it is totally necessary. And if it is not, then can you eliminate it? Can you get AI or a tech or a system to do it? Or can you just delegate it to somebody else? Now, some of you may go, she's vice president now. Of course, she can delegate. What about me? Let me just tell you that I'm just a lowly coach. I do executive coaching. That's all I do. And I delegate the folding of clothes. I know some of you will laugh at me, but and I have had friends laugh at me to go like, you delegate what? Like I can do most housework, but I can't fold clothes. And so I've delegated that. I actually have a person who comes and whose main job is to fold the clothes in my house. It doesn't cost me much, and it has saved a lot of stress in my life. Something to think about. Okay, so really start to think about that. Now, stepping back, we talk about redefine. And this is something else that I have worked with another leader. This time a gentleman. And it was, so what he struggled with was he struggled to be able to clear his emails. He has a lot of emails, quite obviously. Most of them don't require much of him except, yes, no. But there were some that required his approvals. And when I met him, he had 1,500 unread, which therefore results in many people being very upset with him, right? So he's a senior director. He needed to get approvals and so on. He has one of the most interesting ways I've met of redefining, and I thought it was hilarious, right? He redefined it as a game for himself. He redefined it as a game, and he set up his own system. He's very, very competitive, obviously. He set up his own system, his own point system, his own gaming system, and so on, to do emails. And when we talked about how could you redefine it, he himself came up with the idea, yeah, why don't I redefine it as a game? Because he always wins at games. Very competitive. Okay, always wins at games. And he redefined it as a game for himself. I will not go into the complicated rules of the games, but for instance, the first letter of the email determines part of the point system of the game. So he played this game with himself. He redefined what emails meant in his mind. And he managed, I will not say he cleared all his emails. There were many emails he just deleted. But he managed to stay on top of his emails and do the important ones that require his approval, which is the important bit. Yeah. So redefine, eliminate, automate, and delegate. Think of what is it in your life that you can redefine. So it's not a, oh my goodness, I want to cry when I do this thing. What can you redefine? What can you take out of your life? Because yeah, we're all having a bit too much. What can you assign to AI or tech, and what can you delegate to someone else, something else, or just buy some help? Put it that way. I'm not saying that all of these would be able to help everybody, but I am saying that, like what Dr. Nate says, you need to take action before you hit the wall. Because I've hit the wall, I think he has hit the wall, and I've seen clients hit the wall. In the same 6 months period as that lady with the spinal infection, I have clients diagnosed with anxiety, depression, cancers, pneumonia, and finally one hospitalized for she was hospitalized for having constant diarrhea that they couldn't find a reason for, because she was just basically dehydrating. 6 clients in the same 6 months. Most of them either burned out or very close to being burnt out, and almost all of these could have been prevented. And I will join Dr. Nate to say this, right? Which is, if you really feel like it's getting a bit too much and you are starting to go, things aren't right, I'm not quite on top of this anymore, then please take this, webinar as an opportunity to go, yeah, maybe I should stop. Maybe I should take a pause here and think about what else I could be doing instead of gritting my teeth and making it through. I know we are all Asians and we were all taught to do our best, work hard, show grit. And I'm not saying those are bad qualities, but I am saying that there is a limit to all of this, right? If you are getting signs that is not quite right, stop working hard, stop trying your best, stop gritting your teeth, and like just make it through, push through, tough it out, and so on. No, really stop. Maybe the better advice would be take a break. Figure out what it is you can let go of. Figure out what stresses you the most in your life. And it will not, I guarantee you, it will not be what all the other neurotypicals feel. Okay, it will not. But it doesn't matter. If this is what stresses you the most, stop saying, hey, it's such a small thing. Why can't I do it? Because the answer is I'm ADHD. I cannot. Yeah? So just go, yeah, I can't do it. That deal. Now, what can I do to get rid of it or get somebody else or something else to do it for me? So I'm just going to end on that note. This is my LinkedIn. If any of you want to connect with me, I'd love for you to connect with me. I know the picture doesn't look quite like me. I shall claim that it's pre-COVID. But honestly, connect with me and I would love to kind of hear your stories, or if there's something that you want to ask me about, I'll be happy to share.
Okay, great. Thank you, Serene. That was very helpful. And, it's great to see you also reinforcing what Nate said about those symptoms of burnout. I love analogies because I think that just makes it so much easier to remember things. So just, sort of to underline for people again, right? Nate talked about the pebbles in the shoe, and I think, on LinkedIn, we read a lot about office politics, right? Office interactions, and people talk about micro cuts, right? Or, like killed by what, a million paper cuts. A few may not be too bad, but they add up. So, those are some ways to think about burnout. I think Nate earlier talks about it's not so much charging the battery again for your cell phone, but it's actually an injury to the battery itself that makes charging the batteries less efficient over time, right? Lesser and lesser. Could we maybe bring Nate back up as well? And then maybe we can do the questions. And Serene, I really like what you said about read. Again, love acronyms, and that's something that is really useful to remember because, just reflecting on your case studies, you were sharing about your first client that was working those long hours. And I think that's how Nate identified as having burnout, because I say, oh, Nate, I've been working 90-hour weeks, every moment I'm not sleeping, I'm working on stuff on unlocking ADHD, and there was just so little resources. And I want to segue into this, right? Because one of the questions that we received was, what can we get burned out doing something we love? Okay, and because usually we associate with doing stuff that we are not good at, that saps us of energy, and it just gets worse and worse, right? But there are situations, and even I'm using myself as an example here, right? Case study number one here, right? I'm doing something that I love, my ikigai, but I was overdoing it. And so maybe I can get here from Nate first, and maybe after that from Serene about, can we get burned out doing what we love?
Yeah, fantastic question. And absolutely, yes. And in some ways, more risk for burning out because, oh, I love this. And my example with therapy, like I loved it, but then it was too much. And it got to be where, oh, I want this client out of my office. And so that's been a barometer for me. And I'm back in a place with having recovered from burnout. But I start to notice the earlier signs that I love the therapy work. that's what I want to do. And even if I'm not getting paid or in retirement, I want to keep doing that. I was having a conversation last night where if I was making millions of dollars, I'd want to still do therapy. It's so valuable. And yes, and I can get burned out with that. And so
So it
I'll
could be
just
the hyper focus, right? That could be one of the
yeah,
reasons why we don't
yeah,
notice it. Okay.
yes.
Serene, anything quick to say on this before we move to the next question? I'm mindful of
Right.
time. That's why I'm sort
Yeah.
of like rushing everyone to.
No, I mean, I'm gonna echo that, and I'm actually gonna say that hyperfocus is the reason, because when we love something, we are more likely to hyperfocus, and then we have exhausted ourselves, but we don't even realize it. So that's what happens.
Yeah. So I think, it's important to notice what the signals are. Because, when I went to my therapist recently and she looked at me and then she said, you know what, you may not be feeling burnout now, but I see the signs coming on. So it's really to recognize those signals, right? The other thing that I wanted to touch on, and has come up in some of our questions too, and is Nate, from yourself as a psychologist that does diagnosis as well. We know there's ADHD burnout. We also know there's autistic burnout. And folks here that have that combination, that magical combination of ASD and ADHD, right? Which is not as uncommon as we thought before. Autistic ADHDers. So how is that different, or are they sort of similar too?
So how is ADHD burnout different from autistic burnout?
Autistic, yeah.
It's a
Or
really
if a
good
person has
question.
both. Yeah, or a person has
Right.
both.
Well, at least, yeah, it's a really good. I'd have to probably research that more and there might be some differences, but it would probably mostly be in the differences of what are the stressors.
Mm,
So autistic folks, like tags in my clothes, like some autistic, I can't stand. I have to get those out. And Serena was talking about this, where other people with ADHD might not get it. Like, that's what stresses you out. So that's where my mind goes to, is the differences, is what's causing the stressor. But yeah, there's so much overlap. ADHD, autism, and the autistic burnout and ADHD burnout I've seen, it's the same. It's burnout.
understand. Thank you. Serene, for the workplace, I had some questions for you on that, right? Because among the questions that we received is, how do you even communicate? Number one, neurodivergence, that always comes out, right, in the workplace. But on top of that, that you are actually burning out. Is there a more so-called effective way to communicate to someone who's your boss or your colleagues, that you can get the support you need? Because Neil's talking about support as well, right? Without so-called getting yourself maybe into some career negativity as well.
Okay, so firstly, I will say this, and I will say it bluntly, which is you need to be looking at your organization and seeing their culture and your immediate leader, because your direct superior and your immediate organization, if they are not supportive, I will bluntly tell you, don't say it, because it will kill your career. I mean, people will start to treat you differently, and they will
Okay.
take you off whatever career fast track you are on. That being said, I am meeting and I work with a lot of senior leaders who want to support people with neurodiverse. In fact, one senior leader told me that from now on, he's only going to hire consultancy firm. I mean, one of the big fours, will not mention his name, but he said, from now on, I'm only going to hire autistic people, nobody else, because they do so much better work and they always get it right. Oh, I'm not going to hire any of these like neurotypical people anymore. So people are coming round to it, right? And I would say your immediate direct manager is probably the person that you need to be looking at the most and figuring out if now ADHDers, I have no worries. I'm sure they can figure it out whether this person is receptive or not. If you're autistic ADHDer, ask a good friend. I'll be blind and say, ask a good friend. Do you feel like this person will be open now? How do you broach the topic? Broach the topic from the position of strength. Don't broach the topic from a position of support. Broach the topic say stuff like, I am autistic, I am ADHD, and therefore I am creative, I am strategic, I have the big picture. Give me more of that work. This is what I excel in, and I would love to take on more of it. Frame it that way. Don't frame it as I need these accommodations and I need you to take this BAU stuff off my plate.
Thank you. That's very,
Even
very helpful. Yeah.
I was going to say, even if you're burnt out, don't lead with that. Lead with, this is what I do best. Give me more of this. This is where I will contribute to the team. This is my strengths that I bring to the table. Then, when they have acknowledged your strength, then bring in the support. Then bring in the burnout and so on. Because to say you're neurodiverse and burnout is double stigmatizing.
Understand. So
Yeah.
I think from what I'm hearing, it's very wise, firstly, but secondly, is to put yourself in the shoes of the organization. They want people to give them solutions, not problems, right? So it's to frame it in a more positive way so that they want to benefit more from the assets that you bring to the company, rather than be bogged down by the potential burdens, right, or liabilities.
Yeah.
So very business-like.
Yes.
Great. We have some questions as well, based on burnout, because I think Nate and Suri, you both talked about it before. There are situations that people have a lack of control, and the typical ones would be, let's say, again, a caregiver that is looking after kids, whether they're neurodivergent or not, or whether the caregiver is neurodivergent or not, but they just can't get out of the situation because there's not enough support. There's no respite, right? So that's one sort of like a trap kind of situation. And then the other one could be like a sole proprietor. Everything is on them, and there isn't much resources, and they still have to do it. Or even leaders of organizations where everyone is looking up to them and they can't fall. They can't just take a break. They have to be there, right? So how can we survive? Because it's not so easy just to take and say, bye, I'm off for a few weeks or a few months, right? How can we make those situations work? Is there anything that can be done to reduce the burden? Maybe I'll start with Nate first and then Serene.
Yeah, and that dilemma is so real. Maybe one thing I'll say, I often will lead clients or even workshops that I lead through a little practice where on a piece of paper they'll put down the systemic challenges and then their individual challenges to try to differentiate and get clear on what is my stuff versus what really lives in the system. And so, my stuff might be I stay up till 2 a.m. every night watching YouTube videos, and so I'm chronically sleep deprived, or I say yes to things, and I'm perfectionistic, and but then from the system side of things, what are the expectations? What are the risks? And in so many systems, there is this year we do this thing, we add things, and but then really, what is my power, my privilege, and how much can I change the system? And when people get really clear about that, there's oftentimes like, no, there's some really big, powerful systemic things that maybe I can't change. And so I'll, oftentimes help people connect more of some of that rebellious energy that I have to really not buy into this, not drink the Kool-Aid metaphorically as much as possible. Say no, leave the office. This is in the work with individual therapy, is really trying to figure out like what can we do. And like I mentioned before, I think as much as we can get people in your world understanding what's going on, your spouse, your kids, friends, but then also colleagues, your boss or whatever it might be, then there's more of a chance to be able to change things. But there's also the recognition that systems don't change very easily. And so surviving, unfortunately, would then become the option. And at least my goal with people is let's get you to a healthier place as quickly as possible. And that might very well mean switching systems, finding a different job, a different culture. And if we can do that, then let's do that. And as opposed to trying to change a system that is very low chance that you'd be able to. So hopefully that gets to that question.
When you're saying that, it just gave the thought to me, the word locus of control, right? Identify what you can control and what you cannot control. And for things that you can control, do something about it, because that gives the empowerment part. So that addresses one of those criteria, right, of burnout. How about yourself, Serene?
I have had a client whom I went through her entire schedule with her, and she claims she cannot even take out a single 15-minute meeting. So her schedule is packed. 12, 13 hours a day, 6 days a week. And she says she can't take it out. And then I asked her basically that if you dropped, like if you really got sick and you dropped today, what would happen then? Do you really feel like all these meetings, all these projects, or even your company will go to pot just because you are not there? And actually that question made her think, right? And I was like, what's the worst that can happen if you drop this thing? What is the worst that can happen? And it was also for me as well when I was a caregiver, right? When I was the only caregiver to my child, I looked at my child and I go, what can I drop? And what's the worst, right? Like, what's the worst if I dropped, say, housekeeping? My house will be messy, you know? Guess what? I probably live. Okay, for you. Right, so we had piles of clothes on the floor. As long as you could grab something out of a clean pile to wear, so be it, right? So literally, it's what can you drop and what's the worst thing that can happen? Because you have so many balls, you have so much time, so much hands, right? Just gonna have to drop some. And which of them are rubber balls that you can drop and pick up maybe later when you have more capacity? Which are glass balls that you cannot drop? So for me, it was my child. I mean, personally. For that leader, it was her KPI. So she held on to the most important one project and she dropped all the rest of the stuff. And knowing that 1, 2, 3 glass balls that you cannot drop, and just drop the rest. Yes, it'll make you feel terrible. Yes, people will scold you. Yes, you will be in trouble with tons of people. But if the alternative is spending 6 months on your back in the hospital, are you willing to make that choice?
Absolutely.
That's what it comes
And
down to.
when you were speaking, it brought to my mind, right, the issue about our executive function, about the difficulty to prioritize. Everything looks important to us. And that's why, right, we have this trouble. So I'm not sure whether the audience is familiar with the Eisenhower matrix, like that 4 quadrants: urgent and important. Just map it out there. That's how you sort of decide, where one thing goes. So thank you for sharing that. I love the glass ball and the rubber ball analogy. And I think we work best actually with visuals, and that's why I keep on emphasizing some of the analogies that you guys were sharing, because that's how we remember what you're sharing better. The other question I want to raise, and we are running out of time, so I hope the audience okay for another like 5-10 minutes more, maybe 10 minutes after the stop time, is somebody asked here, how can they approach a conversation with family members of an older generation? Because in their vocabulary, in their context, right, burnout is something quite foreign, okay? And whenever the person brings a subject out, they think it's just a different generation that wants to be lazy, not work hard, they don't recognize the problem because they themselves have probably internalized a certain toxic work culture. So it's really a communication, because you want to get support from your own family. So how do we go about that? So we're going to go first, and then maybe Nate will go next.
Actually, I was going to say that I don't really have much cases about the family, but I have cases of people going to approach their boss, which is probably the same
Okay.
generation, with
Yeah.
like super toxic work culture. As one person told me, it's like, my boss sends me emails at 3 a.m. So he's still working at that time. The fact that I go to bed at 1 o'clock makes me work less than he does. Okay, so and the conversation has to be about the value that you bring or can no longer bring to the table. Because unfortunately, that conversation cannot be about care and I need more time for myself. I mean, I'm sorry, Dr. Nate, but that's not like I need to be no longer injuring myself. It's not a conversation that will fly. It has to be, at this point, I am no longer effective, and these are the ways I'm not effective anymore. Right? I am making mistakes because I'm too exhausted. I am unable to decide because I'm in a brain fog. I am, doing things at night that actually has repercussions in the morning, and I'm spending more time trying to correct the mistakes I made when I'm too tired than I am doing the actual work. So it has to be framed like that. Bring your examples, go there and prove it to them. To go, look, this is not sustainable. I'm actually less productive. I'm not less effective, and something has to give.
I'm
So it
hearing you
has to be
say
framed.
business
Sorry.
speak, basically, right? Frame it in the business speak so that the recipient gets it immediately. Thank you for
Yeah.
that, Serene. Nate?
Well, it's a very real challenge, and the stigma and the possibility that people won't understand or will just think, yeah, you're lazy, um, and with doing the individual therapy, confidentiality is big, and so but it's been such a shift in my practice that no, I want to, of course, with the client's lead, involve your family as much as possible, and yeah, the boss and other people. And usually there's that sense of internalized stigma and fear, which maybe this question is coming from that place. I don't think they're going to get it. I think they're going to judge me or critique me or tell me I'm wrong. And that might be the case, and I want to trust clients, and they know their parents or their boss a lot better than I do. And oftentimes I think people are surprised more and I've helped clients write letters to try to articulate things, but come up with ways to really explain it. But I think people are surprised a lot. This is such a ubiquitous shared thing, but a lot of people would be able to be like, oh, okay. No, I do get that. And that is burnout. And me myself, I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I didn't realize that, no, this is hard. And that is just so beneficial when we can get family on board. And so I usually encourage people, let's try. And worst case scenario is it fulfills their negative perspective, or maybe realistic perspective. Oh, they didn't get it. There was the stigma. But it can be helpful to even know that. And then we want to involve anyone that can't, friends or colleagues, that really gets this. And the healing comes with the stress reduction, but also being able to connect with people that really get it. And yeah, so there's a lot there we could unpack, but really having those connections are very important. So this question, I would just hope that parents could really get it, or the older generation, because that will be huge. But don't sit in your own internalized stigma and just assume that people won't get it. And if people don't get it, find other people.
Yeah, you know what I'm hearing from you as well, Nate, is that sometimes in these situations, we may have difficulty articulating just because either we don't know the words or there's a certain barrier emotionally or mentally. So it's to find a third party, like a credible third party. Could be a professional. It could be someone that this person we're trying to reach respects or knows, that may have a helpful story or perspective to share.
Yeah.
And so that gives the credibility and the validity, right?
Yes. And one thing I'll quickly tag in, so there is with the ICD 10 and 11, so the diagnostic codes, there is one for burnout, the Z code. And so that can be helpful with meeting with a psychologist like me or something, where I can give you that. It's not it is a diagnosis, and it's credible in that type of way. And that's something, I do meet these criteria for the burnout syndrome. So that's something for people to just have in their mind, that can be another way, maybe for the particularly entrenched parents that don't want to believe it, but then when there's the doctor's note, maybe, oh, okay, this is a real thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes time to get people educated, right? So we just want to make sure we give credible sources. We're going to wrap it up soon, and as we do so,
can I just address, because I realize there's a bit of a discussion on the webinar chat about people sort of like cherry picking or presenting
feel free,
themselves
jump in.
as a
But before that,
superpower and so
Serene,
on. Yeah.
can my team also share the the post-event
Yeah,
poll? So as
sure,
you're saying
sure.
it, then if people could also respond to the poll, because the poll really asks about how you found this event, what can we do better, and also about the insights. So please feel free to type in even as you listen to Serene.
Sure. So the first thing is, and I'm going to say this, right, which is, to me, ADHD comes with a set of advantages and disadvantages. It's a bit like being Chinese, right? There are times when it's good to be Chinese, and there are times when, it's a problem being Chinese, right? But to me, it's that. But in a work context, if you're trying to present this to your boss, you need to lead with the value before you can ask for the concessions. But make sure that you do both, right? Literally go there and talk about your value, but also go there and talk about the concessions or the accommodations that you are going to need. And try to help them understand, like, for example, that hyperfocus may not be something you can turn on at will. It may turn on things that you are interested in, but not turn on things you are not interested in. And part of the reason why we lead with this is where I'm good at is to try to get ourselves into more of the work that we actually would enjoy, that we actually are good at. Because, we are good at some things that we're just not good at other things, right? The whole conversation is about how do we get more of the stuff that we are good at assigned to us as our duties, and less of the stuff we are not good at assigned to us as our duties. But before you can have the conversation about this is all the stuff I don't want to do, you must first have the conversation about this is all the stuff that I want to do and that I'm good at, and try to give a realistic view of what your superpower is, right? If your superpower truly is that as long as it's this subject, I will be hyper focused. Say that. But if your superpower is like, I don't know when the hyper focus will click on, or it's unreliable and so on, share it as it is, right? But really, it has to lead with value. Otherwise, in a work context, nobody is going to accommodate you for the sake of accommodating you. I'm so sorry, but the world, at least the world I live in, is not that nice, right? People are not going to accommodate your needs if you are not going to demonstrate that you are a valuable member of the team. And I also don't want the neurodiversity conversation to be all about this is a disability and we are worse, and this is all the stuff that the company has to do for us, and so on and so forth. Because it doesn't set you up well and it will impede your career progression. Yeah, you can say all that, but it will impede your career progression. So that's all I want to say about that. I know that many of you are facing challenges, and I'm not going to tell you, sit here and pretend and tell you that it's easy. I've dealt with enough clients, I've faced enough of that myself to tell you, no, it's not easy. But try your utter best to go like, I am a valuable member of this company. I bring good value to it. And therefore, in order for me to give you this value, I need this accommodation. I hope that
I
clarifies.
think it takes different parties, different aspects, right? I think for companies to have the interest or the openness to learn more, to really see how they can support and accommodate in the workplace. So I kudos to all those companies who want to do that, and I hope more and more will come forward. It also takes the individual to have that self-awareness, to know again what can they do for things that they can control and things that they can't, they can't do much about that, but also equip, right, if needed. And then organizations like ours, right, our charity, to sort of come in the middle and give that overall kind of understanding to both sides, so that there's this facilitation, or people like yourself, right, Serene, the coaching, right, Nate, the professionals. It's everyone coming together so that there is different understanding of the nuances. Because one thing I've learned in the last 4 years doing this is never like straight black, never straight white. And there's many layers of gray as well. So it's something that's constantly evolving, and one situation is going to be very different from another person's situation. And so there are no easy answers for this. As we wrap up, right? And please, still stay on, everyone, because we do have something interesting for you. So stay on. I would like maybe each of you to just think about, what would you each say to someone listening who feels they're already hitting the wall, but afraid they don't have time or energy to recover? While you're thinking about it, I'll do my announcements first, okay? And then I'll come back to you guys, but think about it. I'll just repeat again, since we're all neurodivergent here and working memory is an issue, okay? So what would you each say to someone listening here who feels they're already hitting the wall and afraid they don't have time or energy to recover? Okay, so while you think about it, let me share the screen. Let's see, where is my share screen now? I'm like losing everything now. Okay, give me a sec, because I do want to share something useful to everyone that's still here. So here we are. I would like to share actually because some of you were asking about how do you know whether you have ADHD, and so we want to share the self-assessment for the ADHD for adults, so that people who are not very sure, they could check it out. And if they score high, they can actually take the results to a mental health professional for a more formal diagnosis. So again, with this slide, on the left is the ADHD self-test. It is not done by Unlocking ADHD, but by the World Health Organization, the Adult ADHD Subcommittee. So if you do score high, print that out. Then you can make an appointment with a mental health professional and then show them that. On the right, the QR code is the Restart ADHD Starter Kit. Can download it for free from our website, and it's almost like a roadmap if you're a youth or adult with ADHD on how you can prepare for your appointment. If the answer is yes, you have ADHD, what do you expect, going from there? So, and all the local resources too. So please download it, scan the QR code. Do check out the Unlocking ADHD website, because we have a lot of resources there, ADHD journeys, and also links to our YouTube channel with over 40 videos on different topics from finances, medication, careers, relationships, and so on. We also have 2 links to our support communities, our online support communities. We have a private Facebook group. There's about 4,200 right now. And there's also a Discord server. So please do join there for continued conversation, because it's only so much that one can cover, in a short 1.5 hour webinar. And the other thing I'd like to share is that every month we have an in-person event called the Community Hangouts. And as part of the Hangouts, we don't have space to hold too many people, so maybe about 25 to 30 people each time, but it's in person to build that sense of community. And for this month's Hangout, which is always on the last Wednesday evening of the month, we're having a special book launch by another member of our community, Sharon Ong. She's neurodivergent. She's also a special education needs specialist at one of the universities, and she's come up with a book called I Bit Off More Than I Can Chew. I don't know whether that sounds familiar to you. It does talk a little bit about burnout too. And Sharon is launching it at our Hangout on July 30th, Wednesday this month. So she's also generously said that she would donate 15% of proceeds to Unlocking ADHD. So this is how you can also support Unlocking ADHD. So whether you can make it for the Hangout, or even if you can't, but you'd like to get hold of the book, just scan the QR code and support Sharon, and also please support Unlocking ADHD. And my team will also put the links in the chat in case you miss it. The next slide is, this is our donation slide. We just became an IPC charity 2 months ago. So that means that any donation that you make to support Unlocking ADHD, you get a 2.5 times tax deductibility of the amount you donated. And we're also eligible for the Tote Board 1-for-1 matching. So every donation dollar works 2 times as hard. And help us to scale. We are planning to launch an intervention center to provide ADHD informed counseling, and then next year ADHD informed coaching. So help us to build that capability so that we can do more for the community. So please make a donation to support our Fighting for Focus campaign. That is all the slides. I'm actually going to stop share, but my team will also share the links. Now I'm going to go back to our 2 speakers. Okay, so Nate, did you have time to think about it? And Serene?
I did. My short answer is reach out. If you're in that place, reach out for help. And I would reach out to Serene. And if you're in any stage in burnout, but particularly if you're about to hit that wall or have hit that wall, get connected with a professional like Serene, and yeah, because it is too much to do on your own. And the self-help and the other things, you're past that point. If you're hitting the wall or about to hit the wall, you need the big guns. You need someone like Serene to help you, and you could reach out to me too. And I haven't mentioned, but I do a lot of group work. I'm a group therapist through and through, and so I do groups for therapists or other helping professionals. And burnout is one of the key things that we're working on in there. But then I do have other services for ADHD folks. You can Google me and learn things that I do. I don't know that I could do individual therapy with folks in Singapore from my license perspective, but there's plenty of services.
Yeah, and we'll be happy to connect, and just going back to the community part, right? Unlocking ADHD is that community for everyone here. Okay,
Yeah.
so please join the community. Serene?
Actually, Serene will say that if you've hit the wall, you need medical help. Serene is only an executive coach. I will help you before you hit the wall. not when you have hit the wall. Okay, if you've hit the wall, you go to I mean, Dr. Nate, I'm not sure if you can practice here, but you please go and see and seek medical help. But I would also strongly say if you already feel something is not right, please don't hit the wall. Because those of us who have hit the wall can tell you this, it is not fun. It is just not fun. It is not fun to sit at home. And I did that for 2 years, not being able to work. I couldn't study. I couldn't do anything. I could barely get off the bed for 2 years. And that is not fun. It's nothing I will wish on anyone else. So please, take it from Dr. Nate, take it from us. We don't want you to be hitting the wall because we've been there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when my therapist reminded me about the signs coming in, right? And I'm still like struggling a little bit, it's really to review my schedule to say, right? What can I just delegate, cancel, and just say, sorry, I just can't do it now, right? There's no shame in that. Because ultimately you're protecting yourself for the rubber ball, right? To bounce back again. So nothing is final. I just want to close the session here because we've passed the time, but I just thought it's important. And honestly, I would love to do even more because there's so many questions here. I think this is an important topic. Would like to see how we can do something, subsequently. But at least for a start, this webinar is being recorded. We will be sharing it on our YouTube, so it's freely accessible for everyone else, and you're free to share it as well. So for those of you who sign up for this event, you will get an email informing you that it's available, okay, for viewing. So thank you for your support tonight. And Nate, thank you. You woke up early for us. There's a time difference. I really, really appreciate it because it is so important when people don't get a chance to hear from others who are familiar with this issue from a clinical perspective. So thank you for joining us. And I'm
Thank you.
really
This
glad
is
bump into
such
you
a
at
joy.
breakfast. And I'll see you again. I'm going to Missouri this year. And Serene, thank you as well for being willing to support and for sharing your story, because if you didn't share your story, I wouldn't have known about it. And I wouldn't have, 2 years later, right, get you on. So, let's build this community up, right, and share. So thank you,
Yeah.
everyone. Wishing you a good night. Keep in touch. And remember, always reach out, okay? Don't worry alone. Worry with a friend, right? Share that burden, okay? Good night. Keep in touch.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting us. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye. Okay, team, I think we can end this webinar now. And Serene and Nate, I'll get back in touch with